Paulogia, and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. If you're new to the channel, take a second to tap the subscribe button so you can be notified when there are new science, theology, or news videos like this one.
All right. Well, you know, the important thing is, though, you know, a lot of people ask about my mug.
Wow, okay, so no introduction on this episode, just straight into talking about mugs. Well, as long as we're on the topic, I'm still bitter that Bodie and I are no longer mug buddies. Lost out to some fancy new dragon.
All right, we got people jumping on. Someone from Nova Scotia. We're actually going to be talking about, if we make it that far, a news item from Nova Scotia today, so make sure you...
Shannon Q is from Nova Scotia.
I'm the someone from Nova Scotia. Oh my god, this is exciting. It's like I'm part of the show right now.
Yeah, part of the show, I guess.
All right, we'll get to our real items now. Another person from Nova Scotia. 2 people from Nova Scotia. That's awesome.
Okay, so maybe I cheated because I might have signed into my other Facebook account while I was watching the show. So technically, it's still just me. Sorry, guys.
Next one comes from Science Daily. Kids store 1.5 megabytes of information to master their native language. So this article looks at, we typically think of, when we watch a child learning a new language, it seems...
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me right now? They're talking about Nova Scotia and the psychology of language acquisition? This is bait, right? They're baiting me right now. I know I'm supposed to wait until they get to whatever Nova Scotia did that pissed them off, but I am not going to miss the opportunity to talk about language acquisition.
They said language acquisition is a remarkable feat of cognition rather than something humans are just hardwired to do. So it turns out learning to speak a language is more difficult than they thought.
I'm sure this is going to come as a really big surprise to you guys over there at AiG, but there is literally no one in the field walking around talking about how simple language acquisition theory is. I mean, when I was in university studying psychology, I know I just walked into class that day and the lecturer said, guys, it's really simple. I'm not even sure why we have a course on this. There's a pretty solid chance that I'm not even going to listen to what these guys have to say because I love this topic so much. And whatever nonsense these three are going to posit is probably just going to piss me off. However, for anyone actually interested, I'm about to geek out. There are multiple schools of thought surrounding language acquisition theory, none of them simple. There are 3 that are relatively prominent, however. The first of these is nativism, which is also known as innatism. Noam Chomsky propelled this theory into prominence, and it posits that children are born with an innate ability to learn language via a language acquisition device that we are all born equipped with, essentially and biologically. There isn't a particular brain area that we can point to, so it's simply theoretical, but it proposes that all human languages contain similar phonemes, which in English would be affiliated with probably letter sounds. And that is the reason that all human languages contain the same basic elements. The second prominent theory is learning theory. This theory posits that language is a learned behavior brought forth solely through reinforcement. Essentially, as a child, you make a series of nonsense sounds. Ultimately, some of those sound combinations are recognized as valid and reinforced or demonstrated and emulated, eliciting reinforcement and acknowledgement of their value, like a hug, for example, a response, or a happy face from a parent. And thus, those sounds are repeated to garner more of that positive reinforcement. Finally, we have the interactionist approach, which proposes that both social and biological components are imperative in language acquisition. Finally, we have the interactionist approach, which proposes that both social and biological components are imperative for language acquisition. This theory is championed by Vygotsky, and it recognizes that we may have innate neurological structures that facilitate linguistic acquisition, but it is our internal compulsion for communication that propels linguistic acquisition overall via reinforcement and social interactions. There are more theories, and this is a really, really simplistic and rudimentary summary of the entire field. But I mean, what's really obvious is that we find it so simple. So, that's what our important takeaway needs to be from this. It's not like anybody in the field already thought that linguistic acquisition was, complex or anything.
It's amazing.
Yeah, they said based on their calculation, which, I kind of question the calculation, but...
I would love to hear just a little bit more about how you question their calculation, Bodie. This is their calculation. Yeah. I bet you probably have a few questions, don't you, bud?
Based on their calculation, learners absorb approximately 12.5 million bits of information about language. That's basically, in their childhood years. The way they related that would fill a 1.5 megabyte floppy disk. And I still wonder, is that a 5 1/4 and a 3 1/2?
Bodie, you're an engineer, and this is unacceptable. Any true engineer your age would know that since we've been talking about 1.5 megabytes of information, it can't be 5 1/4 inch disks because the usual capacity there was just 360K. Yes, there were eventually later 80-track drives, which were very finicky and created bad sectors, which topped out capacity at 1.2 megabytes in ideal circumstances, but even so, that can't be what they mean. Though they started at 400 megabytes and 800 megabytes, the 3.5-inch disc glory days was double-sided, high density, providing a glorious 1.44 megabytes of storage, which I'm assuming is close enough to the 1.5 megabytes in the story for that to be the kind of disc they had in mind. Get it together, man.
To me, saying it's on a floppy disk does not make it sound impressive.
They do like a huge research and they put it in a
They
floppy
put it on a
disk.
floppy disk. I'm like, what?
This is so easy to lose the information.
Is this 2019? Did I have the right date on this article?
Yeah, Avery, your dates are right, but your conceptualization is way off. They used a floppy disk for a really specific reason. They wanted to demonstrate clearly that although the number itself seems astronomical and it's almost a cognitive perspective, it represents only a really small portion of the information that we assimilate and utilize. The information represented by phonemes and syntax is imperative, but it's also overall a really minute component of neurological processing comparatively. Using an antiquated medium helps drive that point home. Did anyone other than me actually read the research? Just me. It's just me? Why do people only read articles about research?
They're basically assuming, okay, what is a turkey? Is it a
they use
bird?
a turkey
Yes,
as an
no,
example
that
of
sort
all
of thing.
things.
And so they're trying to put it into bits of information, ones and zeros. It's like I grew up on a farm. I saw turkeys all the time. I saw wild turkeys. I saw tame turkeys. I saw the big white ones. I saw the brown turkeys.
Oh, for the love of God. This is how I know that you only read the article and you couldn't have even glanced at the text of the study itself. The word turkey doesn't appear once in the text of the research, guys. Not once. It does, however, appear in the text of the article that you shared. There is a really specific reason for that. The article interviews the researcher who conducted the study, and he uses the word turkey just to highlight the complexity of morphemes. A morpheme is a linguistic unit that cannot be further subdivided. The study itself had nothing to do with linguistic acquisition theory. The study, however, was the first to make a holistic attempt to catalog and quantify the components of language acquisition itself into units. In an attempt to quantify this, they generated a series of formula and made an attempt to convert components of language into units that could be accounted for. This included phonemes, which are unique independent language sounds, morphemes, which, as I mentioned, are linguistic elements that are indivisible to subcomponents, and then they worked on comparative analysis to estimate the bits of information required to get from phoneme to morpheme and morpheme to meaning. This endeavor wasn't an attempt to demonstrate how humans acquire language. It was the first step in constructing a tool we can utilize when theorizing. The study states this on literally the first page. It's in a highlighted box right at the top. You can't fucking miss it. I cannot even understand why you care about this, to be honest. Unless the fact that we are starting to have the ability to quantify and more clearly understand how we accumulate, assimilate, and utilize knowledge is, I don't know, maybe a bit scary. Especially since the more we understand the brain, the smaller the space we have left for that soul I keep hearing so much about. Because not once do they even infer that we are more complex than scientists originally thought. People who study cognition are already acutely aware of that, thanks. We don't need your help. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere trying to carbon date a fossil. Why don't you go bother them? Stay in your lane, guys. Psychology's not for you.
All right, this next one comes from New Scientist. Incredible fossil find may be the first victims of dino killer asteroid.
Finally, I've been waiting for you to talk about this story ever since I heard about it. It's a big deal. But I first learned about Lagerstätten from Jon Perry. I wish he was here to talk about this.
Did you say Lagerstätten?
You're here.
I am here.
So this article has been making global headlines. It's been extremely popular, talking about a find of a fossil deposit in North Dakota that scientists are linking with the crater that eventually wiped out the dinosaurs. So you're a paleontologist. What did you think about this find?
Interesting. They hired a journalist from New Yorker to kind of put the story together. And it says here it took several years. The point is, when you are a paleontologist or a scientist, and you find something that is very interesting, you try to keep it secret. So you're going to write down about something and just release, and everyone's going to be in love with that material.
The point of doing paleontology is for people to learn about it, right? It's a purely exploratory science. So when you do research, you want people to know about it. But there's this double-edged sword in paleontology where if people know where the location is, they can come scoop your discovery. So there is a lot of secrecy in paleontology when they first find a site, especially about where the site is located. And then there's secrecy until it's published about what you found there.
So to be clear, nothing about the media strategy they followed for this paper would take away from the academic validity of his findings, correct?
No. Something that I do was stated clearly on my animations. A lot of times I'll know about something before it's published and I'll sign an embargo to not talk about it until a certain date. And that's what people are trying to do now with science outreach. They want to have the paper published and all the journalism all at the same time to give it a lot of noise. And this is really important right now with how hard it is to make noise in the news because you got Trump competing with everybody for an audience. So you are finding people doing a lot more of this. Maybe when she was in college or when she was a paleontologist in the field, this wasn't a thing. But nowadays, most grants want you to do outreach. And so they want you to make a splash in the news when you publish in a scientific journal.
But it's only interesting if there's dinosaurs, so that's why they're mentioning it in the article.
That's probably part of the
People are like, oh,
sensationalism.
fish buried, whatever. But it's like dinosaurs is much more better.
She's totally right about that. Nobody cares about fish. So all the journalists that wrote about this talked about this being the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, but there are no dinosaur fossils at this site. What we're learning about here is how catastrophic the strike was, and that's why this find is so interesting. We found that the hit in Mexico was so hard when the asteroid hit Chicxulub, Mexico, that it shook the earth and caused tremors and giant waves all the way up in North Dakota. At first, they thought that maybe this was the wave that was caused by the actual impact, and further investigation said no, this is actually a wave caused by the Earth itself shaking, and then that causing waves way up in North Dakota. Now, there was a shallow sea at the time, so North America was covered by a shallow sea. And what we see here is we see all of these marine animals mixed with freshwater animals, fish, and there were some invertebrates in there too. And all of these died together in this one single catastrophic event and were then buried without any predators or scavengers coming by to pick at the bones. And so this tells us that this was a catastrophic event. And right on top of all of that, we have the iridium dust. That iridium dust is the space dust, essentially, from this impact. And to top it all off, you have these little tiny glassy spherules. They're little tiny glass orbs that are from the impact. So this space rock hit the Earth, caused a huge explosion. All these rocks and stuff melted and actually formed it. You could think of it as raindrops forming, but they're of molten glass. You can find these all over the place from Mexico to North Dakota, and they get smaller as you get closer to North Dakota, and they're the right size for us to say that it came from that impact. There's just a bunch of different lines of evidence saying that the rock hit so hard in Mexico that it caused this catastrophic slaughter in North Dakota, and that's what's really significant about this find. We've known that most likely this impact killed the dinosaurs, but this is just the nail in the coffin. Like, we know for sure now.
And they found some of these asteroid remnant glass droplets in the gills of the fossilized fish, correct?
Yeah, fish are breathing it in. They're suffocating by choking on these glass spheres, among other things.
Which was an important thing to find in terms of establishing timing, because it meant that the fish had started breathing impact glass, but then something else killed them before they could choke.
They believe that this happened within a few hours of the impact. So you have the traveling of this wave through the ground, causing standing waves and bodies of water everywhere.
So I called this a Lagerstätten before. Was that accurate?
Yeah, you've got a whole bunch of animals all dead together. There's some really cool pictures in the paper of these fish all dead together, and you can see pretty good outlines of their soft tissue. And there's really no damage from scavengers because nobody around survived to scavenge. And then, of course, over the next few years, they were slowly buried by all the dust settling out of the sky from that impact. So you had really, really nice preservation of these fossils.
They want to say, yeah, this is all from some sort of flood sediment that was triggered by this impact and that sort of thing. There was a massive flood, but not quite a global flood is what they want to say. But why not?
Right, because that's how scientific research is presented. Why not?
If you just look at the fact that there's evidence of floods all over the world, you could say without any other data aside from that there was a global flood. And actually that's what early geologists thought, because they read about it in the Bible. They suspected, oh, this is evidence of the global flood. But as soon as they started to expand on their studies, they realized that, oh, these things happen at different times. And there's a really interesting talk by Adam Sedgwick. He was an early proponent of the flood geology. This is before Darwin's time, slightly before Darwin's time. They actually knew each other. Sedgwick was going around talking about evidence of the biblical flood. You know, he was famous. He was known for this. He was a preacher, and he was also a world-famous geologist. He eventually became the president of the Geological Society of London. And when he was president, he had access to everything that had ever been published. And it was now his job to go over that and study that. And he realized right away, basically, that he was wrong about the flood.
We saw the clearest traces of diluvial action, of flood action, and we had in our sacred histories the record of a general deluge. On this double testimony it was that we gave a unity to a vast succession of phenomena, not one of which we perfectly comprehended, and under the name diluvium, classed them all together. So he's saying, I got excited because I saw the gravel and the rocks, and I saw the flood in the Bible, and I jumped the gun. Having been myself a believer and, to the best of my power, a propagator of what I now regard a philosophic heresy, those are some harsh words, and having more than once been quoted for opinions I do not now maintain, I think it right, as one of my last acts before I quit the chair, before he ends his presidency, thus publicly to read my recantation.
That's from the 5th video in Jon's Stated Casually channel series called Science versus the Ark Encounter that you should definitely check out if you haven't already.
Right, yeah, I think your audience would enjoy it.
If the fish was fossilized in a long period of time, the fish would not have that preserved.
So it had to be catastrophic burial.
Right.
It just infuriates me that one of the things they try to perpetuate is that scientists think that fossils get buried slowly, and only creationists are the ones admitting that things get buried quickly.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. Of course, catastrophes happen all the time. That's how we get the best fossil sites, is when there's a local catastrophe.
It's a myth they perpetuate.
They're banking on their audience not actually knowing anything about paleontology. It seems to be the Ark Encounter's main hope is that their audience doesn't understand what they're teaching them about, because that's the only way you can really get away with what they're doing. The big take home from this paper is that it shows us that we have been on the right track with this understanding of the extinction of the dinosaurs. It also can show us a little bit about what we can expect if we're hit by a giant rock again, what kind of impacts that can have long distance.
If only there'd been a dinosaur version of Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, and Aerosmith.
Yeah. That's right.
And they can identify those bones. Those are from 3 different birds. So the question is, how is it that dinosaurs evolved into birds when birds are already around being eaten by things like theropod dinosaurs?
Bit of a problem.
So the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. Archaeopteryx appears in the fossil record 150 million years ago. So you have a long time period where dinosaurs and birds are living alongside each other. So it's not strange at all that a dinosaur would be eating a bird. That's like you seeing your cousin at a family reunion.
And then eating them.
Well, yes, and then eating your cousin. The confusion that the public has that they are exploiting is the confusion that one thing has to transform into another thing, and once it transforms, it replaces the old thing. That's like saying that England evolved into America and then disappeared in the process. Of course, that's not what happened.
No. People do not want to admit that there was a global flood catastrophe because that points back to the Bible being true. And if what the Bible says about history is true, that means what the Bible says about spiritual things and about the gospel and about us all being sinners and needing to repent and put our faith and trust in Christ is also true.
It's very important to point out that Adam Sedgwick and these early geologists that discovered that the global flood, there is no evidence for a global flood, they were all very devout Christians. This is not an atheist conspiracy against religion. This is just people following the data and interpreting all of the data together instead of picking and choosing the data that they're going to follow. Giving up on the idea of a global flood happened because of the evidence, not in spite of it, like they're trying to claim here.
But it's dangerous to come out at the school and say that you're...
If I said that, she would give me, what is the last one? F here?
F, yeah.
F, yeah, F minus. Yes, that would be my grade.
It is interesting how Christians want to constantly claim that they're victims of persecution when they try and do science. The head of NIH, the National Institutes of Health, not only is he an evangelical Christian, he's a very vocal evangelical Christian that's written lots of books about it. There might be some circles where you get persecuted for being a Christian. I'm sure there's some place somewhere where that happens, but it's extremely rare. If you're a paleontologist and you refuse to accept the data that's in front of you that you're learning about, that actually might be a problem for you to get a good grade in your class. But it's not because you're a Christian, it's because you're not learning the information that's right there in front of you.
4-legged whale that lived 40 million years ago found off the coast of Peru.
only a small number of fossils
Which is
actually found
typical
on it.
when they
Yeah.
find a specimen. They typically.
I mean, it clearly
find a
had
few
legs,
fossils.
but it's not a whale. That's the point. It's just a quadruped. You know, whether it was a fully terrestrial animal or whether it was semi-aquatic, we don't know at this stage. I mean, it was pretty good size, but
But Bodie, the article said whale.
First of all, this is actually a really good specimen. There's a lot of the skeleton there. It's actually spectacular. So these are some of the bones that were found, and this jaw is immediately recognizable as an early whale. So this is a protocoetid whale. So Myocetus is probably the most famous protocoetid whale. And Myocetus was an African species. And the really significant thing about this find is that we're finding early protocoetids all the way over in America. And this is really cool for a couple of reasons. First of all, it tells us that protocoetids themselves made it all the way across the ocean. So that means that they were very, very much aquatic, because we're seeing the exact same species on the African continent. The other really neat thing about this is that its tail is slightly different than Myocetus's, and that the vertebrae are fat. Here labeled H2, this is one of the tail bones of this new specimen. And it's really wide, and it's very similar to the structure that we find in beaver tails and in otter tails. So there's this video online of otters swimming that shows how it is that otters swim when they're trying to go long distance. They actually use their tail and their hind legs together. The whole thing works as one giant paddle. They have this nice elongated fattened tail, and they swim in that manner. And that's exactly how we think that this specimen was swimming. So this is really neat as far as transitional fossils go, because it's showing us this new little bit of anatomy, the fattening of the tail. And we're seeing them on the other side of the world, which means that they had to cross the ocean.
I mean, that's a whale of a tail, actually.
Yeah.
There we knew we
So-
were going to get a pun in there.
They don't
somewhere.
really say
Yeah.
how much of the fossil was found.
What are you talking about, Gabriella? The paper tells us exactly how much of the fossil was found.
Yeah. They literally show the bones that are most interesting, and then they show a drawing with everything that was found and everything that was not found. Like, how do we know that this is a whale? That's a question a lot of people might have. First off, the teeth here are an exact match to other protocoetid whales, and a match to things like Durodon and Basilosaurus, the basilosaurid whales. They had these same teeth. That tells us that it's related to these whales. Basilosaurid whales, for those that don't know, are the fully marine whales that have little tiny stubby legs on the back end. And we know for sure that they had a tail fluke. This animal, we're not sure if it had a tail fluke, but we do know it had a fattened tail. The fattened tail is really significant because we've suspected for a long time that the transition from no tail fluke to a tail fluke, the middle period of that was a flattened tail like an otter, then eventually like a beaver, and then that fatness of that tail would migrate all the way down to the tip, and you get a fluke like modern whales have. It's showing exactly what we've had in our models for a long time, and bam, we just found it in the ground, the actual bones from our prediction.
You're just going to find like pieces of fossils, like pieces
Right.
of fossils, no, pieces of bones. So it's really hard.
When a paleontologist is trying to follow an animal group through the fossil record, what they do is they find a couple of key traits, as many as they can, that are unique to that group and not found anywhere else. And those are the dead giveaways. When you have a specimen this complete with all of these bones, there's no doubt as to what you're looking at. It's just really cool to find it in Peru.
Cool.
This shows how desperate they are to find a whale
Right.
type of missing link.
We're no longer desperate to find links in the evolution of whales to land animals. We've known this for a long time, that whales evolved from land animals. The reason this is significant is because of where it is. It shows us what the migration pattern must have been for these. We didn't know what the whale migration pattern was before this, and we also didn't know for sure how the tail fluke came about. And it seems, looking at this specimen, that our models were correct.
This might come as a shock to a lot of people out there in the world, but whales actually existed before land animals.
Indeed.
Day 5, flying and sea creatures were made by God. That's not a problem for an all-powerful God.
Whales did not exist before land animals. They evolved from them. And the fossil record is very, very clear about this. They're saying that they're not sure if this thing actually swam or not. When you follow the fossil record, they start evolving in Africa and in the Middle East. And now all of a sudden we see them starting to appear in South America. You have to swim there to get there, right? It was so good at swimming that it can swim across the Atlantic Ocean.
All right, this one is the one from Nova Scotia. The person who's from Nova Scotia commented a couple times and was like, I want to know what's going on in Nova Scotia. So we're at that item now.
Oh my God, that sounded just like me. Avery, that's in like my top 6 Shannon impressions. That is strong game. My cadence isn't easy to capture because of the accent, so I'm impressed.
It's not good news though, so maybe we shouldn't be so excited about hearing it.
I waited through 30 minutes of this shit for bad news? That's just great. So what do we do? What do we do over here in Nova Scotia? Is all the rum gone? All the rum better not be gone. Did we ban four-wheelers? Let's go. Get on with it. I cannot take the anticipation. What did we do?
Nova Scotia offering transgender propaganda book Transphobia quiz to 12-year-olds. So this is about a book which is going to be offered in grade 8 language arts classrooms in the province of Nova Scotia in Canada. So it's not mandatory reading, but it is part of each classroom's book offerings.
Oh, you have got to be shitting me right now. I have been losing my mind. And you let her pissed off because we put books in our school libraries that you don't like? You're kidding me, right? There's a book available in schools that helps to educate children on acceptance and could potentially have the effect of assisting a gender-confused child in recognizing that they don't need to conform to stereotypic gender representations to be, quote, normal. And you have a problem with that? You know what? Of course you do. Of course you do. Of course you do. Why would we ever want to teach children tolerance, acceptance, and understanding of not only others but themselves? God forbid, right? Where's my Nova Scotia flag? Because I'm sleeping in it tonight.
If you believe that boys are boys and girls are girls, then you're the bad guy.
Yep.
Exactly.
So unless you're transgender yourself or 100% support that religion,
Absolutely.
You're okay.
you're a bigot, you're transphobic, you're the bad guy.
Jesus Christ, you guys are awful fast and loose with the definition of religion, eh? Literally anything that disagrees with whatever nonsense you're spouting is a religion. Atheism is a religion. Being transgendered is a religion. Homosexuality, also a religion. I really and truly believe that you do this foolishness because you can then twist reality into a pretzel, where who people are is a choice that they make and not just who they are. Because if Yahweh made people in this multitude of wonderful ways and then proceeded to condemn them for existing in the fashion that they had no choice but to exist in, then Yahweh is either a monster or he's imaginary. You need it to be a choice. Because if it isn't, you can't justify your disgusting positions. Also, yeah, that's what bigotry means. Own it. You're bigots. You're a bunch of hateful, bigoted bigoters. Yeah. And you know what? You guys are bad guys.
It's transphobic to express concern when they feel frightened by men in a woman's bathroom.
Yes.
So
it's not the fact that the man is in your bathroom as a girl that's the problem. It's the fact that you don't feel comfortable about it. That's
you are transphobic. And it's just like, this
Do you know how
is...
many women have been attacked that way?
Barely fucking any. Literally, barely any. But you know who does get attacked in washrooms, you bunch of bigots? Trans people. All the time. With a degree of significance that is statistically exceptional by comparison. I've included a study from UCLA on this specific issue. It has a great breakdown demonstrating how often people with a multitude of identities experience refusal of entry, verbal accosting, and physical and sexual assault in public restrooms. Trans people are being harmed and degraded for just wanting facility access that the rest of us take for granted as a given. Why are we the ones being told to be afraid? You aren't concerned about protecting people. You're using a trope to push your narrative that hate towards a certain group of people is justified because we should all be afraid that they are going to hurt us because of who they are. This is tacit vilification, and it's a common tactic people use to justify their hate. They create a schema about an entire group of people that represents them as being dangers to those amongst our in-group who we conceptualize as the most vulnerable. If we're concerned about protecting the people who are the most vulnerable, then the tables in this conversation need to be turned. When you take that approach, you can construe your hate as honorable because it's not hate, it's protection. And perhaps that helps you sleep at night, but hear this, it's a lie. You're either being lied to or you're lying to yourself so that you can keep being awful and still look in the mirror. If your concern was in any way whatsoever that people need to be protected from harm, you wouldn't be advocating a position that is known to cause harm. In order for your argument to hold any water, it comes preloaded with the assumption that people who are transgendered are dangerous and that their motivations are nefarious. These tropes arm other bigots with the internal justification that they need to strike out at them to the point that there is nowhere safe. They can't use a washroom that aligns with the gender they were assigned at birth because they will get attacked or berated. They can't use the washroom that aligns with their identity because people like you have everyone wrongly convinced that they're there to assault someone. And if they're genderqueer, they can't use a gender-neutral washroom because you use the same tropes threatening potential assault and voyeurism to prevent that too. They aren't dangerous predators, you monsters. They're the ones who are in danger. They just want to pee in peace, and they can't because people like you insist on being alarmist assholes all the goddamn time.
The person who wrote this book is married to someone who is a woman who identifies as a trans man. And that person wrote in an article, indoctrinating your children into my LGBTQ agenda, that is their agenda. And I'm not a bit sorry.
Welcome to the great and powerful kingdom of Quotemindia, where context has no relevance. And the only thing of any importance is constructing a narrative of hate and fear, just like Jesus would have wanted. The quote was in fact not a quote at all. It was the title of an article that was written for the Huffington Post by S. Bear Bergman. The title, as most titles are, was intentionally provocative and more than a little bit hyperbolic because the article itself had an important overall point. In the article, the author indicates that LGBTQ+ advocacy to children entails simply teaching children that members of that community are kind, nice, normal, and deserving of respect. And if simply teaching your children that other human beings are deserving of respect is tantamount to indoctrination, then no, he's not sorry. And he shouldn't be. AiG saw an article on LifeSite, which is one of my very least favorite Christian propaganda publications. That article misgenders the author purposefully and then proceeds to entirely misrepresent the article that was written by him, but it does at least link it. All they would have had to do was click on the blue letters and they could have read it for themselves. But that doesn't fit the narrative. They count on you not looking for yourself. Guys, don't let them do it. Go read the source materials. They misrepresent everything. I dare you to prove me wrong. Please try. At least you'll be looking.
And the reason parents and Christians should care so much about this is because, first of all, transgender ideology hurts children. This is just a social experiment on a generation of kids.
This isn't a social experiment. This is a book that is available in classrooms to help children realize that it's okay to be who they are, to teach them that they should accept, understand, respect, and help facilitate the opportunity for others to do the same. There is no one roaming from classroom to classroom telling little boys that they're girls and telling little girls that they're boys. There is a new book being simply made available that might help some of the children in those classrooms understand themselves maybe a little bit better, and to help other children in that classroom learn that they can be better than the hate and the confusion that they are sometimes taught to feel by people just like you guys when someone is simply different from them. No one is trying to attack our children by telling them to accept other people for who they are. And if you think that that is an attack, that's telling. I, for one, am going to sleep really soundly tonight, wrapped in my Nova Scotia flag, knowing that when my son enters one of those classrooms, there's a book there. Should he need it, if for any reason he feels that he can't come to me and he's in turmoil about who he is and what to do. Lucky for me, none of you are in charge around here. Stop preaching love to distract from the fact that you're propagating hate. We're Nova Scotian, and we indoctrinate our children in the religion of acceptance and understanding and respect for human dignity. And we're not sorry either.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today.
All right. Well, that was a strange mix of things. Huge thanks to Shannon Q and Jon Perry for joining me today. Shannon's channel covers topics like atheist advocacy, communication strategies, and complex conversations. And Jon is the man behind both Stated Clearly and Stated Casually, both top of their class for science communication. If you haven't already, subscribe to both. Once you've done that, click on this next Paulogia video to keep learning about science, theology, and the claims of Christians. See you there.